Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to start hearing evidence from Deputy Assistant Commissioner Joanne Smith of the London Fire Brigade. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. Good morning, members of the panel. I now call Ms. Joanne Smith.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Smith. I understand you're going to make the affirmation.
I am, yes.
Thank you. Well, the words are on the screen. Would you read them out, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, please sit down and make yourself comfortable. All right.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Millett, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Smith. You gave evidence at phase one of this inquiry, and I'd like to say thank you to you for coming back and assisting us yet again with our further investigations at this phase two. My questions are intended to be short and simple. Sometimes they don't work out that way. If you would like me to ask the question again or rephrase it, I'm very happy to do so. Can I ask you also, please, to keep your voice up so that the person sitting to your right can get down on the transcript everything that you are saying? Also, please don't nod or shake your head because those gestures don't come out on the transcript. A yes or no must suffice in that situation. If you need a break at any time other than our scheduled breaks, which we will take twice during the course of the day, plus the lunch break, please say and we can take a break.
Okay, thank you.
Now, you've made one statement for phase two of the inquiry, pursuant to Rule 9, and that's dated the 2nd of July 2021. Can we please look at that? That is at LFB 00121219. Is that your statement, or first statement, for phase two of this inquiry?
It is, yes.
And can we go to page 34, please? Is that your signature above the date, 2nd of July 2021?
Yes, it is.
Have you read this witness statement recently?
I have, yes.
And can you confirm that its contents are true?
Yes.
You've also made a second statement, I think, to the police. That is at MET 3080606. And you can see that that is dated the 16th of September 2021. Is that your police statement of this year?
It is.
And have you read that statement recently?
I have.
And can you confirm that it is true, the contents are true?
Yes.
Are you happy for those two statements to be taken as your evidence to the inquiry?
I am, yes.
And have you discussed your evidence with anybody before coming here today?
No, I haven't.
I want to ask you first, if I may, about your role at the LFB. And I can take this, I think, in summary. At paragraph 6 of your inquiry statement, you say that you joined Essex Fire Brigade in 1995 as a control officer, and then you received several promotions thereafter.
I did.
And in 2007, you joined the LFB as an assistant principal controller, or APCON. Yes?
APCON.
APCON. Yes. And your title then changed from APCON to Senior Operational Manager, or SOM, or SOM, in 2010, was it, or 2011?
I believe 2010.
2010. And you say in paragraph 8 of your witness statement to the inquiry that you were seconded to the Chief Fire Officers Association, or CFOA, in September 2012. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you remember when in September 2012?
I think I started with CFO on the 1st of September.
1st of September?
Yes, 2012.
And what did you do there?
So my role at CFO was to engage with all the fire control rooms across the country. The fire control project had just been cancelled, and DCLG had awarded a sum of money to all control rooms to procure new mobilising systems, and I was seconded with another member of the control to monitor those projects and feed back to DCLG on any improvements they were making.
Right. And we may come back to that in due course later. It's right, I think, that you then returned to the LFB in January 2015.
I did, yes.
Was that at the beginning of January?
Yes.
And at which point, I think you then took on overall responsibility for the operational support team as it had become.
Yes.
That's the OST. And that included line managing the training element of OST, did it?
Yes, by that time it included, OST was a group.
Was a group. On the night of the fire at Grenfell Tower, on the 14th of June 2017, you were the on-call SOM in the control room, weren't you?
I was.
We've heard that. And we've heard also that you attended the control room and managed the control room as SOM from about 2:15 a.m.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Now, in paragraph 6 of your statement, you say that at the start of 2019, the name of your role changed again from SOM to Senior Control Commander, or SCC. Is that correct?
It did.
But that was only a change of name, am I right? Not a change of role.
No, it was a change of name.
And you also say that as of the 1st of January 2021, you became, by way of promotion, a DAC, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Control.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. And is it right that as at today, you occupied the newly created role of Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Control and Mobilising?
I do.
And you report, I think, as at today, is this right, to AC Jonathan Smith, who is the head of Department for Operational Resilience and Control?
Yes, that's correct.
And you're still employed by the LFB?
I am.
Now, can I ask you about reporting lines? You say in your witness statement, the inquiry at paragraph 7, that when you joined the LFB as an AP Con, Scott Hayward was your line manager. Was Scott Hayward always your line manager from 2007 until he left the LFB in July 2019?
Yes, apart from when I was seconded to CFOA.
Apart from that period, yes, of course. And can you explain how, in general terms, that line management worked in practice?
So there were 3 of us in the senior management group, and I shared an office with the other AP Con that became the senior operations manager. So I would describe it as a close working group. Obviously, some of the lines we had, I was responsible for the technical team when I first joined, and Lindsay Turner was responsible for the training team. But just in the course of making changes and delivering the service, there was a lot of crossover between the two. Any technical changes that need to be made we need to make sure that the training was aligned to that, and vice versa. So it was a close working relationship I had with both Lindsay and Scott.
Right. And did you work closely with Scott Hayward?
Yes.
How often would you meet?
Daily.
Did you have formal meetings whereby you would sit down, exchange information?
We had formal meetings and informal meetings on a daily basis. So formal meetings would be regular every 2 weeks, possibly, and informal meetings daily.
And would those informal meetings be documented?
No.
What about the every 2 weeks meetings, the formal meetings?
No, I don't believe so. We would just work through a list of topics that we were currently working on and just get some updates on various projects Lindsay and I were leading on.
Were there any, we know there were brigade command management meetings which were minuted.
Yes.
Were there other meetings which involved you and Scott Hayward which would be minuted?
Only meetings with other departments. So if we were visiting Union Street for a meeting, those would be minuted more often than not, but not internally.
Now, I want to ask you about the technical support group and the brigade control training team before the OST was formed. You say in your witness statement at paragraph 7 that as AP Con you had line management responsibility for the technical support group, or TSG.
Yes.
And 2 control commanders who included line management responsibility for 2 of the 4 watches, so about 50 staff. That's what you
correct.
say.
Yes.
Can you explain the technical support group? What was that?
So the technical support group was a team of control staff that worked daily in a team to make sure that the mobilising system and all systems that we used in control were up to date and were relevant. They often worked on changes to the system, and they also did some event planning as well. So a whole range of stuff, but mainly the monitoring of the mobilising system.
Right. So this was essentially, is this right, overseeing how the machinery worked?
Yes, I'm recommending changes to its functionality as well, and seeing those changes through into the control room.
And did the technical support group itself meet? Did it meet regularly?
I believe it did. It had a control commander in charge of it at the time, and I believe they met regularly as a team.
Right. Now, you say that the TSG consisted of Steve Perry, Kyra Smith, Terry Page, Graham Bonnet and Paul Pope.
Chrissy Smith, but yeah.
Chrissy Smith.
It did.
What rank were they?
So Steve Perry was the control commander in charge, and the other team members were senior operations managers. Senior control officers.
Senior control officers. Is that the same as an SOM?
That's the same as an AOM.
The same as an AOM. And you also say you were in charge until that the TSG merged with training to become the OST in 2010. Do you remember when in 2010?
That would have come in with the change of shift pattern. I think that was towards the end of 2010, but I can't recall.
Scott Hayward told us yesterday, I think, although he didn't put a precise time on it, that the change in shift pattern happened in 2011. But is that right?
That may be true. The agreement to change the shift pattern was signed in 2010, but maybe the implementation took some time.
So before the end of 2010, when the OST was created, there were two separate teams. Is this right? One, the technical support group, and one, the Brigade Control Training Team,
Yes.
BCT. Why were they separate? Do you know?
I don't really recall. I wasn't in London Fire Brigade when they were two formed originally, but I would imagine that just because of the demand for the technical assurance that was needed. So in 2004, I think, or 2004, they'd procured a new mobilising system. So the team was probably established then.
Right. And before the merger, at the end of 2010, who was responsible for the training team?
Lindsay Turner.
And she reported to Scott Hayward?
She did, yes.
And were you involved in that reporting? Did you know from time to time what was transpiring between Lindsay Turner and Scott Hayward?
On occasion, we would discuss workloads, we would discuss changes that were coming, and as I said, there was some ongoing projects that we would also talk about all together, because some things that I was doing had an impact on Lindsay, and vice versa.
Right. Now, this may sound obvious, but is it right that the Brigade Control Training Team developed and delivered control training?
Yes.
Yes. And did that mean that the technical support group had no role in the development and delivery of training?
No, I don't believe it did. So the technical support group would suggest a change, or there would be a change implemented, and they would talk directly to the training team about how the training team would manage that change and deliver that to control staff.
Do you know why the two teams merged in late 2010?
Yes, so that was part of the change of shift pattern that we went through, just as we were planning to go live with the fire control project.
And what was the basic reason, can you tell us, for the change in shift pattern at that time?
So as I understand it, the premise of fire control was 9 regional fire control rooms that would be able to take each other's calls and support each other as a network. I think DCLG at one point were concerned that some fire control rooms would reduce their staffing to below levels and let the rest of the network take those calls. And so they proposed a charging system, whereas if a call overflowed to another RCC, regional control room, that the other control room would be charged for that. And the Deputy Assistant Commissioner in charge of control at the time wanted to avoid that. And so we created a shift pattern that had variable staffing. So we peaked with our staffing levels as the calls increased in the evenings.
I see. And what was the practical effect of the two teams merging to become the OST? It's an open-ended question, but in short. can you tell us what the practical effect was, the knock-on effect to you at least, was of the two teams merging to become the OST?
So the practical effect was that I retained responsibility for the 2 and 3 members that were in the old technical support group, and Lindsay retained responsibility or line management responsibility for the 2 trainers that had gone into that team.
Right. And then let's look at the OST. You say, following the merger into OST, it consisted of Paul Pope and Graham Bonnet, Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea.
Yes.
Yes. Where did the OST sit in the overall LFB organisation? Can you give us an idea of that?
So it was just, it was the only control department that worked day shift. So it was a support department. So it supported the control room. It dealt with any changes that needed to be made. It dealt with queries from operational departments as well. So it just sat below Lindsay and I.
Where did it sit in the directorates? Which directorate was it in?
It was with Control and Mobilising.
Right. And that sat where?
That sat in Operations Directorate.
Right, so ORT?
No, just the Operations Directorate under AC Dave Brown at the time.
Dave Brown?
Yeah.
Dave Brown's directorate. And Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea, what was their rank?
So Chris had been a control commander when it was a separate team, and then when the teams merged, she was. They were both AOMs, Assistant Operations Managers.
And you then go on to say that Paul Pope and Graham Bonnet retained responsibility for the technical element, including mobilising, and they reported to you as the SOM, but Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea reported to Lindsay Turner.
They did, yes.
Given that the TSG and training team had merged into the OST, why did you and Lindsay Turner take on a different area, or retain perhaps a different area of responsibility with different lines of reporting?
I don't think we saw it as different lines of reporting. Like I say, we worked together quite closely. Lindsay and I shared an office, so we would know what each other were working on, and the OST was a newly formed group, but the skill base from Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea were training, and they'd had experience in delivering training and creating training packages, as had Lindsay, because she'd previously come from the training team before her promotion. And I was more familiar with the technical elements that both Paul Pope and Graham Bonnet had been working on.
As between you and Lindsay Turner, was either of you the lead for the OST, or was that role shared between you?
As I understood it, that role was shared between both of us.
Now, Scott Hayward said in his first witness statement, and I'll just show this to you, LFB 3055191, page 18, paragraph 50. He says there, OST are led by one of the SOMs who have responsibility for the team and workload. From 2009 to 2012, this was Lindsay Turner. From 2012 to the end of 2014, it was Vic Bagnall. And from 2015 to date, it has been Joanne Smith. Do you agree with that statement?
So from 2012 to 2014, but I maintained line management responsibility for both Graham and Paul. From when the OST was created.
But that period is when you were at the CFOA?
Yes.
So during that period, is it right, Vic Bagnall essentially took your spot?
No, I believe he replaced Lindsay. So I think Keith Diamond, when I left for CFOA, Keith Diamond took over my roles and responsibilities, and when Lindsay moved to projects at headquarters, Vic Bagnall took over her work streams.
I see. And do you remember when she moved to projects at headquarters in Union Street?
I think at the end of 2012, maybe the beginning of 2013.
Now, in his second statement, and I think I can just read this to you rather than by showing it to you, what Scott Hayward says is, at paragraph 38, Between 2009 and 2019, I delegated training responsibilities to a number of SOMs, all of whom were control staff, and so would have held the appropriate knowledge and experience to oversee the training. Do you agree with that?
I agree, yes, that we were all control staff, that we had the experience and knowledge, having all been control officers and moved up the ranks, yes.
Do you agree that he delegated training responsibilities to SOMs?
Yes.
And what did that mean in practice? How did the delegation work in practice?
I think that we would discuss training as well as other items that we had to work through as a team, and one of us would take responsibility for that, or take responsibility for a couple of tasks to achieve the goals that we were trying to achieve.
Right. Scott Hayward gave evidence over the last 2.5 days, and he described the reporting system as one of reporting by exception. Is that something you recognise?
That is something I recognise with Scott, yes.
And how did that work in practice?
So I think in practice we spoke daily, we knew what each other were working on. I often attended meetings at headquarters with Scott. I was often in the same meetings with him, and we often discussed our ongoing work on a daily basis. So yes, I would report anything to him. I probably reported too much to him.
Right. The impression he gave from his evidence, a fair summary of what he told us was that he left you to get on with it, and you reported to him only when things weren't working in accordance with the way they were supposed to work.
I would have definitely done that.
You would definitely have done that, but would you have done more?
Yes.
Now, when the OST was created...
Well, sorry, just make sure you've understood this. Speaking for myself, Mr. Hayward certainly gave me the impression that he rather left it to his SOMs to deal with, in particular, training, and didn't get directly involved himself very much. Is that a fair understanding as far as you're concerned?
I think that's a fair assumption, sir, but I wouldn't have not communicated what I was doing with him.
Right, thank you very much.
When the OST was created, did you have regular meetings? Did you, the OST, have regular meetings internally?
Yes,
Yeah.
They were opposite my office and directly off the control room, so we would have talked every time I was in at Merton.
And so those meetings were informal, daily, passing meetings?
Yes.
Presumably not minuted?
No.
No. Were there formal OST meetings?
I don't believe so.
Did you and Lindsay Turner meet separately to discuss matters of importance about the OST?
In terms of Lindsay and I just meeting together?
Yes.
To talk about OST? I don't recall that, no.
Did you talk about just training, delivery of training, content of training with Lindsay Turner?
Not specifically, and not until I started work on the Lacanau investigation.
If we go to your witness statement at paragraph 7, please, on page 3, your inquiry witness statement, you say there, and it's about halfway down, you see on the right-hand side of the column of text the word during, about halfway down the block of text. Can you see that? During this time, I took a lead role.
Yes,
You
I
can
can.
pick that out. Read with me. It says, during this time, I took a lead role on a change of shift pattern for control staff, implementing a quality assurance system into control, a relocation to a new control building at Merton, and the adoption of the Chief Fire Officers Association CFOA National Coordination Centre from West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service to London Fire Brigade Control. This included the establishment of a new team to manage this role and development of new working practices, agreeing memorandums of understanding with government departments. I was also involved in drafting the control room response to the Lacanau fire. In addition, part of my role required me to be on call 1 week out of 3 to assist the control room during large or complex incidents. Can you explain what your role was in drafting the control room response to the Lacanau fire?
So I was originally asked, I think, by Scott Hayward to look and help with a gap analysis from the control point of view. Because I had the technical responsibility for TSG, they had already been involved in some work in terms of downloading calls and drafting a timeline. So I had been involved just purely for my responsibilities with the technical support team. And then Scott asked me to get involved in looking at the gap analysis and undertaking a gap analysis, and then that led to me attending meetings with the Lacanau House Board, and during that time we were asked to put a control report together that detailed all the control actions and the history of FSG.
Just to be clear, can I show you the control report? It's at LFB 404724. Is that the report that you're referring to?
Is this the published report?
Yes.
That was published in November 2012, and I believe that had some changes to the original report that Scott and I worked on to make it more public-facing.
Right. Can I take it, though, that you were very familiar with the findings, recommendations and actions detailed in this document?
I believe so.
Yes. Now, if we go, please, to your witness statement at page 17, there's a heading at the bottom in relation to Action 11, and there's a question based on initial FSG training. And you could see the question. The inquiry understands from the Lateral Assurance Review, that's a later document from 2018, that the initial FSG training that was developed as part of Action 11 included a suite of training presentations covering fire behaviour, building structure, fire survival and emergency call handling techniques, FSG role play, and a presentation on Policy 790 in 2011 to 2012. Please explain your involvement in the development and implementation of this initial FSG training that was developed after the Lacanau House fire. I will come back to the rest of the question, but if you turn the page to page 17, to page 18, and look at page 18, paragraph 45, you say this. However, Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea were responsible for the creation of training packages. In 2011 to 12, my involvement in this training was to review and comment on training packages in my role as a SOM, and due to my involvement in the Lacanau House report, along with Scott Hayward as a POM, Lindsay Turner was the line manager for training. Why was training a part of your role as an SOM?
So it wasn't. It was just that I'd had experience, and both Scott and I had been to the Lacanau House Board, had drafted the control report and knew the actions from the gap analysis. So it just made sense that when the training packages were created, that we had comment on those to make sure that they aligned with what we'd agreed.
Right. Did you have any prior experience of developing training packages before assisting in the Brigade's response to the Lacanau House fire?
No, so one of my roles in Essex, I would have delivered some training packages, but no formal training, no.
Right. So it sounds very much as if your role evolved into oversight of training, content and delivery as a result of your initial involvement in the Brigade's response to the Lacanau House fire.
No, I wouldn't have said that. It was purely commenting on from our experience that we'd had through Lacanau. There was no requirement for me to oversee that. Lindsay and her team were capable of producing the training packages. Just as a peer support, I commented on those just to make sure they were right, because we wanted to learn the lessons from Lacanau and make sure those situations didn't occur again.
When you say you wanted to make sure they were right, what were you measuring what she was producing against?
Just in terms of what we'd committed to deliver from the Lacanau House board and the report.
Now, I want to ask you about Brigade Control Management meetings a little bit. I think you attended those, didn't you?
Yes,
Well, they're known as BCMMs.
they are.
How often would they take place?
I think every month, and I think there was a period of time, and I don't know when, in tenure, that they moved to every other month.
And do you remember when, to the best of your recollection, BCMMs started? When the first meeting that you ever attended was?
Yes, I think when I first joined London Fire Brigade, they had a management meeting, but it was split into a management meeting and then a more operationally focused meeting. So we'd discuss changes and operational incidents. And shortly after that, I think it was merged into one meeting.
And before June 2017, did the Brigade Control Management meetings, or BCMMs, take place every other month? Until that time?
I think they may have gone back to monthly.
Right. When was
at one
that?
point. I can't recall. Apologies.
And how did the OST's work feed into those meetings?
I think at one point there was a desire for a member of OST to attend, and if they didn't attend, I think whoever was in charge of OST at the time gave an update. I think there was a technical meeting minute and there was a training meeting minute. So how it would work prior to when Lindsay and I were in post, Lindsay would do the training update and I would do the technical update. But if one of us was absent, we'd probably cover for each other.
Now, we have 3 monthly reports entitled Operational Support Team Monthly Reports for June, July and September 2011. Can we look at the one for June 2011 at LFB 00111 This is entitled OST Report June 2011. And you can see training is the first item on the agenda. Fire survival training is the first of those. Mop-up training for outstanding staff is now complete. Progress is being made in constructing a shorter refresher training package. Just looking at that as an example, is it right that these reports would be submitted to BCMM attendees?
Yes, that could have been. I don't recall, but that could have easily happened.
Right. Do you know who compiled reports such as these?
I would imagine that was Chris Sharp.
And would you read documents such as these before Brigade Control Management meetings?
No, that was probably supplied with the papers for the management meeting, and it was probably discussed then.
And what was the purpose of these reports?
The one from the OST?
Yes, yeah, reports such as this. This is an example.
I don't know. I don't recall ever there being a question about asking OST to provide an update. That may have been something that Chris did and thought was very helpful to us.
And would they be discussed at the meetings?
If there was anything the operations managers wanted to raise, yes, then they would be.
And were they created every month or every other month, as far as you were aware, before you left for secondment in September 2012?
I'm sorry, I don't recall.
When you came back to control in January 2015, did these continue to be produced by the OST for the Brigade Control Management meetings?
No.
So at some point they stopped, did they?
Yes.
Do you know why?
I don't know.
Now, at these meetings, the BCMM meetings, is it right that the training being discussed was the training being developed and delivered by the OST?
Yes,
Yeah.
it would have been.
And looking at the meeting for July, LFB 001111579, if we can. I'm sorry, June. This is the June BCMM meeting. As you can see that you were in attendance, SOM Stibbards. Do you see that?
Yes.
That's you. And then at page 3, if we go to page 3, bottom of the page, we can see a title CSS training FSG SOM Stibbards, ops managers to contact Andrew Mackay directly to arrange for him to deliver familiarisation to assistant operations managers, and then over the page, SOM Stibbards spoke to Andrew Mackay and confirmed that control staff should be able to have an access to the training. What was CSS training FSG?
So as part of our investigations and our desire to have better two-way communication with the incident ground following the Lacanau fire, we looked at various methods that the control can contact the incident ground and vice versa. One was the CU telephone that we'd put in there, and the other was access to the CSS system and the instant messaging on the CSS system, so control staff could send a direct message to the incident. And that is just to make sure that all staff have access and just some familiarisation training on how to access the system and use it.
So this is not about call handling?
No, this is about using the instant messaging service on CSS to pass information to command units.
Now the date of this BCMM is the 15th of June 2011. We know from other documents that the very next day, 16th of June, something called the Haygate Challenge took place. Was this part of this minute related to that?
I don't believe so.
You don't believe so? Did you oversee the CSS training FSG referred to here?
No, we'd explored a way, and I'd obviously talked to Andrew Mackay about accessing it. I'd obviously probably been involved in talking to IT about getting control staff access to it. And it was just that they were going to come down and provide some familiarisation training about how to log on to the system,
right,
and then access the instant messaging bar.
Right. Can we go back to paragraph 17 of your witness statement on page 7? I want to ask you about call coach. You've got a heading, call coach, there.
Yes.
2010 to 2012, and you say, one technical function that I was responsible for delivery during this period was call coach. When I was head of the technical team from 2010 to 2012, Control was using the ProCAD mobilising system, and I was responsible for procuring a new quality assurance system in 2010, which was Call Coach. We use this programme to monitor and review LFB's call handling standard. I exhibit a note which sets out in detail this process. Supervisors have a responsibility for 3 or 4 CROs, and so they listen to 3 calls a month for each of these individuals and graded them against the control call handling standards. CROs received a monthly appraisal of their call handling techniques from their supervisors on this basis. Supervisors and or line managers would then identify additional learning or training points for CROs through this process. Did this process of monitoring and reviewing CROs' call handling occur before the introduction of Call Coach?
No, I don't believe so.
Do you recall when Call Coach was introduced?
I would imagine 2010.
Do you know why it was introduced?
Possibly late 2009.
Do you know why it was introduced?
Yes, because LFB had no quality assurance system for monitoring calls.
And was it introduced as a response, perhaps an early response, to the Lacanau House fire?
No. I think one of my main reasons and one of my main tasks when I was brought into LFB and was successful was to procure a quality assurance system for control.
Right. And even though you were in charge of technical, nonetheless, you regarded this aspect of quality assurance as falling within your responsibility.
So yes, because it was a technical solution, it would have required a technical solution to do it, which is why it fell under my responsibility. The call handling standard that you can create and add into the technical solution, that was formulated by control staff predominantly, but Lindsay oversaw that project too.
Now, you say that supervisors listened to 3 calls a month for each of these individuals.
Yes.
As you say. Can we just look at LFB 00121231? This is the note that you exhibit as JS2. And this details the process. If we look at page 1 on the screen, this is version 5, 10th May 2010. and the title here is Call Quality Management Application Call Coach. And if you look at paragraph 1.4, it says a minimum of 1 call per month per CRO will be assessed through Call Coach. And then at page 2 of paragraph 3.2, it says assessors should select 1 call from the selection available and discard the remaining media by deleting these from the individual's folder. Is it actually the case that assessors would review 1 call per individual, not 3?
I think that might have changed as we got used to the system and as we got used to using the system. But you're right, as it says there, I can't be sure.
Right. To be fair to you, it's not crystal clear. If we go to page 6 of this same document under part 2, this is part of Appendix A, identifying calls. In the 3rd paragraph there, it says, if not DUP, this will be the first of the 3 calls for which WAV files are to be sent for assessment. Now, first, what is DUP?
It's just an acronym for a duplicate call.
Oh, right. It's a shorthand duplicate.
Yeah.
And that does refer to 3 calls.
Yes.
How does that fit with the reference to 1 call earlier in the document?
So I think originally, just looking at the start of the document, that TFG might have provided 3 calls, 3 random calls, and that the senior operations manager with the control officer would have picked one of those.
Right.
But I believe that was expanded.
And then it does go on to refer to 3 calls in the next few paragraphs. Now, you say in the same paragraph of your statement, as I've shown you, that OST were responsible for the random selection of these calls from the call log, as this was a manual technical task. Who in OST would be responsible for that selection?
So that would have been Paul Pope and Graham Bonnet.
And how would they go about identifying which calls to select?
So they had a standalone recording system that they would just search on the operator ID. So all our control staff have a unique identifier, and they would just search on that and then download 3 calls, making sure that one of them wasn't a duplicate call.
Right, so there was a random selection, but for duplication.
Yes.
I see. If we go back to page 1 of this same document, it goes into some detail in paragraph 1.3. It says, all calls will be assessed by an officer carrying out a higher role within the control room. This will include long-term temporary promotions which can be estimated as being longer than 3 months. Can you explain how the calls were assessed?
So the Call Coach project had the ability to add in a call handling standard, which is what I referred to before, with that had input from control staff. That was placed onto the system, and therefore when it says team leader here, but when a senior control officer was sitting with a control operator, they would go through the various elements of the call and mark those against the call handling standard.
I see. Now, you refer to the call handling standard. I think we have that on page 7 of this document.
Yes.
Which is Appendix B. LFB Call Handling Excellence Standard. Is that the standard you're referring to?
Yes.
I see. And if you look at the right-hand side, you can see some red numbers in boxes. Is that or are those the scores to be given to CROs based on their performance?
I believe so, the maximum score.
And that would give an overall score out of 100, which I think we get at paragraph 3.11 on page 3. I don't need to take you back to that. And is it right that the scores would be fed back to CROs in a private session?
Yes.
And are you aware of any of the supervisors, and I assume that that's AOMs and SOMs, is that right?
No, the supervisors would have been AOMs, or for the call handling for AOMs would have been the OM.
AOMs and OMs?
Yes.
Right. Are you aware whether the supervisors of those ranks undertook that review routinely on a monthly basis during the period 2010 to 2012 when you left for the CFOA?
I believe so.
Did anybody check if they were carrying out that assessment routinely?
Yes, I think the OST team from the old TSG, Paul and Graham, would have monitored that because they were responsible for placing the calls into the folders.
Did you ever learn that it wasn't being carried out routinely?
Not that I can recall, no, not specifically.
And when carrying out the audit of the calls, how many CROs were involved? Was it all of them or just?
It would have been all of them.
Right. Do you remember whether you or Paul or Graham identified additional learning or training points for CROs through this process?
I don't, but I don't think it would have been for TSG to do that. So that would have been the AOMs and the OM who was assessing the calls.
Right. Just to take a step back, when the assessment took place
Yes.
and the scores were arrived at and fed back to the CROs, were those scores then fed back up the chain to a supervisor, not an SOM, OM or AOM?
Yes, so the AOM would have been able to see the scores as well. It was on the system, so it was a system that showed the scores, so they would have been able to see those scores, but they would have talked to the control officer just about the various elements, and if they scored below, they would address those, and that would have either been done locally on the watch, or if there had been something significant, I would assume that they would have asked OST in terms of Chris and Nikki to assist.
And that was on the training side rather than the technical side of OST.
Yeah.
Did you have any insight into what the training side of OST was learning about CRO performance in these assessments?
No.
You didn't?
No, not really. I think just from my recall about Call Coach, and because it was a manual system which took a lot of OST's time to create, I think in general terms between senior managers there may have been some frustration that when we rolled out a new change to procedure or practice within the control room, that we weren't easily able to identify all those calls relating to that change, and therefore it was very difficult to quality assure whether that change had been received well and actioned.
To the extent that you were involved, was the Call Coach auditing process effective in identifying additional learning or training points?
I didn't hear to the contrary otherwise.
Would you have done had there been a problem?
Maybe not.
Right. Are you able to say how often FSG calls were included in Call Coach reviews?
Never.
Never?
Never.
Why not? That sounds like a rule. Was that the case?
It was, yes.
Why was that?
I think that was written into the policy. And
Why
I
is
think
that?
that was I think there were two issues there. I think as an overall management decision, the decision was taken not to put fire survival guidance calls into Call Coach. And I think the call handling excellence standard that was created, it was a new system, and we were just getting used to it, and the detail that would have been required for fire survival guidance would have been difficult to capture.
So how did supervisors quality assure FSG calls?
In terms of just providing support and assurance to them when a control officer was taking a fire survival guidance call. As you know, they weren't
right, so they weren't trained
frequent
on or assessed as part of this process?
No.
Did you or anybody else draft any kind of report so as to be able to inform senior management, for example, Scott Hayward or AC Brown, about the outcome of the Call Coach reviews that were taking place?
No, I wasn't asked to do that, and I believe the decision to not take FSG calls was taken with the when we had a Deputy Assistant Commissioner in charge of control. I think there was an agreement with that between him and the representative bodies that fire survival guidance calls weren't quality assured.
You say you weren't asked to do that. In general, can you tell us, were senior management, so Hayward and Brown, ever informed of the results of these reviews on any regular basis?
No.
No.
Sorry, can I caveat that with actually they would have been discussed at Brigade Control Management meetings, and they may have been discussed at joint secretaries of the joint sex meeting.
Were any targets set? We've seen the scoring, but were any targets set, like a minimum score?
Possibly. I do have a vague recollection of that, but I'm not entirely sure.
Right. Can we go to LFB 001090082? This is what we've come to know as the Kelly Report, 3rd of August 2010, drafted by SM Steve Kelly, otherwise known as Ned, I think. And this was an audit of the Brigade Control Training Department, and specifically the FSG training course. First, do you recognise this document? It is only the first page, and I can show you more of it, of course.
No, I'm aware of SM Kelly's report.
You are?
Yeah.
Did you see it at the time?
I didn't recall when I was asked about it, but yes, I probably did, just in my normal course of being a senior operations manager within the...
Yes, in fact, I think we know a bit more than that, because you actually commented on it, didn't you?
Yes.
Yes, and if we go to page page 9, I think is probably the best place to go. Page 9, we go there. There's paragraph 67, which I'll read to you, and this is underneath the heading Quality Management and Assurance. 67. Control officers and team leaders are subject to a monthly review by line managers using the call coach system. A confidential assessment of performance is conducted against set criteria on a one-to-one basis using the imported audio files to support discussion and feedback. This provides for a very effective workplace assessment of staff. And we can see some comments. Now, before I show you the comments, the call coach system is the same system we've just been examining.
Yes.
Yes. And where it says this provides for a very effective workplace assessment of staff, there's a comment in the comment box, J23 on the right-hand side, dated 8th of November 2010, which you can pick up on page 13. If we just go to page 13, we can pick up the comment date there. As J23, you can see towards the foot of the page, it's your comment. You see that?
Yes.
It's 11/08/2010. In fact, I think that's the 11th of August 2010, rather than the 8th of November 2010. Yes?
Yes.
And if we go back to the comment, please, on page 9, we'll look at it in the comments box. You have commented, team leaders do not have a monthly review. And then underneath that, you've written, not according to our data and the opinions of our OM. And that's against the statement, this provides for a very effective workplace assessment of staff. Can you explain what you meant by that comment, that second comment?
I would imagine that the operations managers had provided some feedback to us as the senior management team, that it wasn't as successful, or that it was difficult maybe to achieve in the day. It may be because at this time we had moved location, and there was some difficulties in finding areas in the new environment in Merton, and it took some time to set up the call coach systems because they were standalone systems. That may have been why I've made a comment about the data.
The move to Merton, as I recall it from Mr. Hayward's evidence took place in February 2012, I think.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And this is August 2010.
Oh, is it? Oh, apologies.
Right. So, just going back on your answer, perhaps more generally, let me ask it more generally. Why was call coach, at least in the opinion of your OM, not a very effective way to assess staff's call handling?
I'm not sure. I would imagine that I just would have received feedback that it wasn't as effective.
Did that mean that it wasn't an effective way of identifying new training or learning points for CROs?
I don't think so. I don't believe I had that opinion. I thought it was, apart from it being a manual system, I thought it provided LFB some assurance.
Why were you the one providing feedback on this report and not Lindsay Turner?
I'm not sure Lindsay didn't provide feedback.
Right.
I would have just provided feedback, and a lot of the comments I notice are just, corrections to make sure the document reads right. So I correct senior instead of
right.
A team, just to make sure the language is correct and that it is reflective of controls, procedures and practices.
I mean, this section of this report, and indeed much of the report, is about training. Why were you commenting on the quality of the training, given that it didn't fall within your remit or the ambit of your work within the OST?
I'm not sure I comment on the training. I think I comment on what's written in the report, and trying to make sure that is reflective of actually what control do and my understanding of what control do and manage. So I don't think I comment generally on the training.
When you received this callback, this feedback from at the OM, did you or anybody else think at the time to look at adopting a different method for assessing call handling?
No, but I don't think we would have not actioned it. I think everything that came up and through us from management meetings, we would look about how we could make it better.
Right. Do you know whether your comments were fed through to the final version of this report?
I don't. Those comments probably were just shared with Scott and Lindsay.
We haven't been able to find any final version of the report which showed any reaction to this comment. So can we take it that there wasn't one?
I would imagine that it was just shared between Scott and Lindsay, yes.
Right. What happened to call coach, if anything, in the light of the fact that at least one OM thought that it was not a very effective workplace assessment?
As I said, we would have worked on those comments and tried to make sure that people thought it was an effective tool.
Now, this was only a few weeks before you. When you went away in January. I'm so sorry. I'll try this again. When you went away in September 2012, was call coach still running at that stage?
Yes.
When you came back from secondment in January 2015. Was it still running at that stage?
Yes.
Did it run consistently between your departure in September 2012 and your re-arrival in the LFB in January 2015?
I have no reason to believe not, but I couldn't be sure.
When you came back in January 2015, did you find out? Did you take steps to find out whether call coach had been running in those intervening years?
No, I didn't, but I would have imagined whoever was performing my role would have taken that on. That would have been a normal responsibility of someone.
Ms. Smith, I'm going to pause at this point because it is now 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Well, it's just coming up to 11 o'clock. As I think you all know, today is Armistice Day, and so I invite you all to stand and observe the 2 minutes silence in memory of those who died in 2 world wars and subsequent conflicts around the globe. Thank you very much. Yes.
Ms. Smith, from January 2015, was Call Coach used thereafter?
I believe so.
Now, in Scott Hayward's first witness statement, paragraphs 96 and 97 at page 39, and we don't need to go to it, he says that in November 2015, so you were back at the LFB by then,
Yes.
at the same time as the introduction of the vision system, Call Coach was replaced with a system called NICE, and the discussions about NICE were still continuing in 2019. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you help us? What does NICE stand for?
I don't believe it has an acronym. I think it is just the NICE quality assurance system and recording system.
Right, so it's not even an acronym.
No.
Right.
Sorry.
Is it right that no reviews of calls were taking place from at least then November 2015?
Not in a quality assurance review process, just that would have just been happening on watch with control and supervisors, so just on ad hoc basis.
Right. So during the Call Coach years, that presumably was happening as well?
Yes, it was, yeah.
And so what happened was that aspect of quality assurance continued on watch with supervisors watching with Call Coach, and then Call Coach just fell away, did it?
Yeah, so the change of mobilising system brought a new quality assurance system, and because we were no longer using the previous recording mechanisms for that, then we couldn't use Call Coach.
Right, I see. So is it the fact that the technical changes in the control room with the coming of the vision system meant that Call Coach no longer fitted?
Yes.
Yes, I see. And until the introduction of vision in November, late 2015, was there any time when FSG calls were used in Call Coach?
No.
Right. Can I then turn to FSG and go to page 8 of your inquiry witness statement, please, paragraph 18. You say there, in addition to my role before I was seconded to CFOA, I reviewed all FSG calls. After the Lacknell House fire, I recall I asked the TSG to collate every FSG call and high-rise call which was entered onto a system. I listened to all these calls to ensure that the correct advice was given in accordance with PN 539 and our general call standard was achieved, exhibited above at JS3. This FSG call review process was not a formal requirement following the fire at Lacknell House, but it was one I undertook of my own initiative, having informed the POM, Scott Hayward, of this. Any FSG calls, high-rise calls that were dealt with well by CROs may have generated positive feedback to the call handler, and I exhibit an example of such feedback at JS4. If any issues arose with the call handling, this would be highlighted to the relevant line manager, who would be expected to discuss these issues with the CRO and assess whether there was need for further training. First, can you tell us when you carried out that review?
So probably started late 2009 and carried on through until I left the CFOA.
What prompted you to carry out that review?
The Lacknell House inquiry and the findings that the findings from that, and that we were rolling out a change to some of the training, and it was a way to check that training was effective.
Did you report your review findings to anybody?
Yes, so if I had any issues with any particular calls or any information given during a particular call, I would speak to the operations manager to speak to the CRO about that, or the AOM. There were probably some general themes, or maybe one in particular that we would have discussed and that would have gone into training was that we had noticed, or I had noticed, that instead of being quite specific in terms of the protect advice with blocking using blankets or towels or bedding to block the doors for the smoke coming in, some control officers were saying just use anything, and I think we fed that back in, or I fed that back in to the training to make that more specific.
Right, let me see if I can break this up a little bit. So late 2009, after the Lacknell House fire, you decide to review all FSG calls.
Yes.
Now, those FSG calls, were those only those received at Lacknell, or were they previous calls as well, and indeed some after Lacknell?
So, apologies if I can just, it might be easier if I explained. Every FSG call was captured on a database. So we had a database for all our fire survival guidance calls, and when a control operator took a fire survival guidance call, the supervisor or the operations manager would enter the details onto that database. So they were always listened to routinely. Whoever was the duty brigade control senior managers would have done that on duty at the time, and often we would have listened to them together in the room. We shared an office, so Lindsay and I would listen to them together. It wasn't unusual that Scott was also in there too. But this was specifically to do with high-rise incidents, and I listened to all high-rise calls, some of which were fire survival guidance and had fire survival guidance calls in them.
And how far back in time did your review?
I didn't go back, so it was from the point that I started to listen to them in 2009 onwards.
I see. So I'm just trying to get a feel for this process. So as of late 2009, you started, is this right, to review all FSG calls as they then happened thereafter?
Yes.
Where they had come from high-rise calls, high-rise buildings, and other calls from high-rise buildings that were not FSG.
Yes.
And you would review those. Would you review those regularly, or only when they happened?
When they happened. So I think I set up a process where TSG would look and see if the control room had dealt with any high-rise incidents in the 24-hour period, and then they would download the call recordings for me and send them to me.
Did they form part of the post-incident debriefing that the control room carried out?
No, this was just a review that I undertook in addition to my normal day-to-day duties.
Right. And would you crystallise your findings from your review in a document?
Yes, I think TSG provided a spreadsheet with a list of calls on them, and I would annotate any comments that I had on that.
And would you send those comments within that spreadsheet up the reporting chain to Scott Hayward?
No, I would talk directly to the operations manager, or talk to Scott and Lindsay if, like I say, if there were any trends or anything particular. They were all aware if a CRO had generated some positive feedback, as I said in my statement. They would have been aware of those letters that I would have drafted.
Were you the only one carrying out that review, or did others help you with it, or carry out their own review?
I think at one point the control commander in TSG may have helped me. By that time it was Peter Suarez. But generally, yes, just down to me.
And was your review carried out on this rolling basis, I think, as you've described it, until you left for the CFOA in September 2012?
Yes.
Did you do the review did you carry out the review using Call Coach?
No.
It was just listening to the calls that had been assigned to the database?
Yes.
How many calls do you think you reviewed during the period late 2009 to early September 2012?
I would only be guessing. If you asked me about the incidents, probably about maybe 45, 50, and some of those could just have one call attached to it, and others may have 5 or 6, or some could have 10.
Yeah. And you say, as I've read to you, if any issues arose with the call handling, this would be highlighted to the relevant line manager,
Yes.
who would be expected to discuss these issues with the CRO and assess whether there was need for further training. Do you remember actually raising any issues with call handling by the CROs?
I would imagine I did, yes.
Can you give us an example?
There might have been 1 or 2 where I would have suggested that the CRO was clearer. Maybe there was the questioning technique, maybe they talked over the caller and not listened to what the caller had said on occasion.
And was any training ever identified in order to remedy any particular problems or trends that were emerging?
So the trend of not being that specific with towels and bedding and everything,
Right.
I believe was one example of that.
I see. And just so that I'm clear about this, you were measuring what you heard on an incident-by-incident basis against the policies. Is that right?
Against against 1093, I would say was uppermost in my mind, and with regard to high rise, that we were following the government guidance on stay put.
Right. So that I'm clear, 1093 is the 1993 Home Office circular.
Yes.
The Dear Chief Officer letter.
It is, yes.
And the government guidance on stay put, was that GRA 3.2 at that stage, the 2008 edition?
No, I don't believe it was. There was, during our Lacanal investigations, just from a review online, DCLG had produced some guidance for callers in high-rise residential premises, and it was that guidance.
What about the Brigade's own policy on emergency call handling, 539, which had been issued in 2007 and I think was then reviewed in early September 2010? So in late 2009, when you started this review process, did you not use PN 539 as well as a yardstick by which to measure the quality of fire survival guidance calls?
So the appendix to 539, which is the FSG, fire survival guidance, I believed was in line with the principles of 1093 anyway, so I would have used the principles in 1093, which would have aligned with PM 539.
Right. Of course, one of the questions was whether 539 did align with 1093, because that was the purpose of the gap analysis, wasn't it?
Prior to the Lacanal House fire, yes.
Well, after the Lacanal House fire, the gap analysis was started, wasn't it?
Yes, yes.
And it produced its findings in April 2010, yes?
Yes.
And therefore, when you started your exercise in late 2009, that gap analysis hadn't yet been completed?
No, but I think we'd identified some lessons, and that was just probably the process until it had been published. But I think we'd identified the key issues.
So it was one of the reasons you didn't use PN39 as your yardstick against which to measure FSG calls as part of this review, that it had departed from national guidance and you felt safer using national guidance?
No, not particularly. I don't think I saw it that this was just to make sure, this review was just to make sure in my own mind that basically what we were reviewing and what the outcomes from the Lacanal board and our investigations were actually making real changes in the control room in terms of when we were talking to callers. That was my sole purpose for undertaking that review.
Yes. Well, really what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is, given that the Brigade had Appendix 3, I think it was, to policy number 539, at the time you started this review, and continued to have it right the way through, why you didn't use that as your measuring stick against which to measure the quality of the FSG calls?
Probably because we knew that we had some changes to make to PM 539, and while those were being changed, we'd been familiar with 1093, and I'd been familiar with 1093 and its content from reviewing it and just used.
Now, we know that PN 539, and we'll come to this in detail later in your evidence, but just for the present on this review process, we know that PN 539 was amended in early September 2010 as a result of the gap analysis. We'll look at that later. But after that, why didn't you use PN 539 Appendix 3 as your yardstick to measure FSG calls?
I may well have done.
Right.
I may well have done. It was just my learning and my experience from Lacanau and what, as a control room, I believed we'd learnt from that and employing that when I was just listening to all high-rise calls.
Right. Okay. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment for a break?
Yes, I think it is. Thank you. Well, as Mr. Millett said earlier, we have a short break during the morning as well and during the afternoon. I think this is a good time to take the morning break. We'll stop now, please, and resume at 25 to 12. And as with all the other witnesses, I have to ask you, please, not to discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Would you like to go to the usher? Thank you. 25 to 12, please. Would you ask Ms Smith to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, all ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms Smith, can I just ask you to be shown this morning's transcript, please, at page 36, where I asked you a question about a report being sent up either to Scott Hayward or AC Brown about the outcome of the call coach reviews. And your answer at line 15 was, no, I wasn't asked to do that, and I believe the decision not to take or put FSG calls was taken when we had a Deputy Assistant Commissioner in charge of control. I think there was an agreement with that between him and the representative bodies that fire survival guidance calls weren't quality assured. Now, I just want to ask you about that decision. Can you date that decision?
So I think that would have been very early on, shortly after we procured the call coach system.
When was that?
I think that was 2009.
Before or after Lacknell?
I maybe before, but I'm not entirely sure.
Right. Was Lacknell not an occasion on which to revisit that decision?
Potentially. Potentially, I just know from when we were beginning to implement call coach and we were going about, and the staff were going about designing the quality assurance, that there had been an agreement made that fire survival guidance calls or any calls that would have been subject to any disciplinary proceedings or hearings weren't to be evaluated.
Who was party to that agreement? By which I mean, who in the brigade was ultimately responsible for agreeing that FSG calls would not be part of the call coach review process?
So, as I say, I think that was agreed by the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Control and Mobilising at the time, and I think that might have been agreed at a union meeting.
And who was the DAC?
Alan Payton.
Alan Payton?
Yes.
Do you remember whether either Scott Hayward or Dave Brown or both of them had any role to play in that agreement?
They possibly, any discussions about that would have been held at a joint committee meeting in which Scott would have been present, and AC Brown might have known. I think he might have had line management responsibility for Alan Payton then.
Was this not discussed at a brigade control management meeting at the time?
It might have well been discussed at a management meeting, and they might have had the similar opinion, and that might have been fed up to the DAC at the time. I really can't recall, I'm sorry.
Can I then take you back, please, to your inquiry witness statement, page 8, paragraph 19 this time. We looked at 18. Can we go back to 19? And you say, I do not know if this review of all FSG stroke high-rise calls continued when I was seconded to CFOA in 2012, but when I returned in 2015, I once again requested and reviewed all FSG calls. First, did you provide anybody in your team with a handover of this review task that you had undertaken and had been running for the previous 3 years or so before you left to the CFOA?
Yes, so the senior management team were aware that I was doing that.
Yeah, they may have been aware, but did you provide a handover of the task? Did you say to anybody, I'm going to the CFOA, could you please continue my review of FSG calls?
No, I believe I might have spoken to Scott and said, who will do this in my absence?
That's a question. Did you get an answer from Scott Hayward?
Not that I recall, but it wasn't something that Scott had given me to do. It was something that I had been doing just because I wanted to make sure that the changes were being implemented.
Yes, absolutely. I understand that. And at the point you left, were you not concerned that this self-appointed task that you'd taken on and been running for 3 years was continued in your absence?
Not particularly, because all FSGs would have been reviewed anyway. And I knew they were probably entering into some significant workloads with procurement of a new mobilising system. They were in the middle of outsourcing, I believe, or that had possibly been resolved by them. But no, I saw it as a task that I gave myself, that I undertook, mainly in my own time, to just make sure.
Just breaking up that answer, if I can, you say all FSGs would have been reviewed anyway.
Yes.
As part of what system or practice would they have been reviewed?
Just as part of a practice that when I joined the senior management team as an APCON, that was done. The calls were entered onto a database, and the duty control manager would have listened to those calls. As I said, sometimes we shared that because we sit in the same office.
Yes, but the purpose of your review was to, as you say in paragraph 18, it's still on the screen, to ensure that the correct advice was given in accordance with PN 539. So was there, when you left, a system or practice in place whereby that quality review that you had been doing continued?
Not for high-rise calls, but for all fire survival guidance calls, yes.
And who was carrying out that review? Who would have been doing the review in your absence in that way?
All FSG calls, whoever was on duty at the time an FSG call was received. As you probably know from the data, fire survival guidance calls aren't frequent. On average, one a month. It wasn't a lengthy task. It was just part of their role, like they would have picked up any organisational or operational issues that had occurred when they had been called in to a room for a large-scale incident.
Now, further in that answer, you refer to the new mobilising system and the significant workloads with procurement. Now, you left in early September 2012. Vision wasn't installed until the latter part of 2015.
No.
Did the procurement exercise, which drained all this workload, as you say, start as early as September 2012?
So yes, there had been some talk on that. They were starting to look to procure a new system.
And why did that create such a workload within the control room that might detract from the quality control or quality assurance exercise in relation to FSG calls?
I don't know. That was only my assumption of what had happened when I was away at CFO. I wasn't there.
Okay. And you also mention outsourcing.
Yes.
In fact, that had been completed on by the 1st of April 2012, but it didn't relate to control at all, did it?
It had a significant impact in control, in terms of staff morale, and it also meant that control staff weren't involved in the requirements gathering for the new mobilising system. So there was a knock-on impact that was felt all the way through to Vision.
I follow. Now, can I then ask you about what Mr. Hayward said in his evidence? And I summarise, but it's day 199, page 64, lines 5 to 6. And he told us that SOM Diamond and SOM Bagnall took over from you when you went to the CFOA.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you know that at the time you left?
Yes.
You did. When you came back, did you see any feedback or reports of their work by way of review, such as it was, on FSG calls?
No.
Did you ask?
No.
Why is that?
Just because they were well aware of their responsibilities as a duty brigade control senior manager, as I was when I left. So they would have known that was a task to undertake, and would have I've no doubt that they would have carried that out.
I mean, when you left, and you say this task, this FSG call review process, as you call it, was one you undertook of your own initiative. When you left for the CFOA, Did you ask Scott Hayward to make sure that that initiative was continued by SOM Diamond and or SOM Bagnall?
So the high-rise, listening to all high-rise calls, no, I didn't. As I said, I can recall a conversation with Scott. I did several things prior to my departure at CFOA. One was a performance report that I used to produce monthly for all the watches, and listening to those high-rise calls as well. And both he knew I wasn't going to be able to do when I left for CFOA.
Now, when you came back, as you say in paragraph 19, you say, I once again requested and reviewed all FSG calls. It was no longer possible to monitor all high-rise calls due to the volume of calls the LFB now receives in relation to high-rise incidents. When did you review all FSG calls when you returned? Was that something you did straight away? You took up the reins again, or was it a bit later?
No, I think every time we had an FSG call into control, if I was the duty, I would review it, and I would say more often than not, even if I wasn't the duty, I would listen to it.
And by that stage, 2015, were you reviewing FSG calls against the by now re-amended or re-amended PN 539 Appendix 3?
I'm not sure I was, no.
Why is that?
It was probably just based on my experience and my understanding, and having listened to a vast amount of fire survival guidance calls over the year, having known 1093 and 539. I wouldn't say it was against any particular standard, but just my experience and knowledge of all those documents and the requirements.
Now, during your time at CFOA,
Yes.
which was some just under 2.5 years, were you involved at all with fire survival guidance or developments in fire survival guidance?
I would like to have thought so. One of the main reasons for taking the secondment to CFOA was to understand, after we'd been through the Lacanau fire, to understand other fire and rescue control rooms and how they worked and how they operated, and as well as undertaking the review of the changes that control rooms were making to mobilising systems. Me and my colleague were allowed to run a number of seminars, and that involved gathering all control room managers from across the country to come and discuss various topics. We talked about buddy arrangements and the buddy system. We talked about resilience, electronic data transfer, and one course we ran was on fire survival guidance. So I think we had opportunity to explore that, because we were in a unique position that hadn't been afforded to anyone from control, again, that we could gather those staff together. And I think following the Lacanau fire and the recommendations that we wanted to make to 1093, I felt that was a really good way to pursue that and get input from other fire control rooms.
During that period, am I right in thinking that you didn't review FSG calls in the same way that you'd been doing so when you were at the Brigade?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't have access to them.
No. Did you learn anything during your 2 and a bit years at the CFOA about the quality of the call handling that you had heard before you left, or the fitness for purpose of the LFB's own policies?
No, I really moved to a more national level, and that national level involved interaction with DCLG. I think the main lesson I learned, that there was no mechanism, and there didn't appear to be any mechanism to pursue a change to 1093 with the recommendations that we'd made and we'd come across from Lacanau fire.
Right.
I certainly understood, talking to my national colleagues, that no other fire control had experienced what we had experienced for the Lacanau fire. some shared learning and an understanding about the way different control rooms manage those calls.
When you came back then in January 2015 from the CFOA, did you investigate what changes had been made to call handling policy, policies in relation to communication with the incident ground, or call handling practice or call handling training so far as FSG was concerned in your absence?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
Because I'd come back from a role. I'd left my role. Someone else had been doing my role during that time. There had been consistency. Scott was still in charge. Keith Diamond was still in a senior operations manager role. I wouldn't have thought there would have been any need to check.
Now, you say it was no longer possible to monitor all high-rise calls due to the volume of calls the LFB now receives in relation to high-rise incidents. Do you mean you alone couldn't carry out the task prior to June 2017?
Yeah, I apologise. I think that's a bit misleading. It was really about the high-rise incidents we appeared to be going to as LFB now. Not so much the number of calls. It was just the incidents. But in terms of that, it's because my workload increased considerably when I returned in 2015 due to the introduction of the vision mobilising system.
Could you not have delegated that task to others?
I think as my workload increased, so did the workload of OST with the vision mobilising system. They certainly didn't have capacity to be able to do that.
Given that Call Coach, as a means of quality assuring calls, although not FSG calls, as you've told us, it seems, had fallen away after 2015, was it not important to institute or reinstitute some kind of quality assurance calls in relation to high-rise buildings, even if not FSG calls?
I think that would have been possible. That would have been possible, but I think because these high-rise incidents maybe would have becoming larger, that actually on watch I'd left a debrief process in place. So control in 2010, maybe 2011, introduced a structured debrief process. So that wasn't there before, which would have dealt with high-rise incidents and allowed control officers, supervisors and operations managers to feed in any of their findings and discuss that on watch with themselves.
Now, at the end of paragraph 19, you refer, by way of Exhibit JS5, to the standard which is current. I just want to identify that if I can. That's at LFB 00121236. Now, this is entitled Control Room Quality Assurance, 29th May 2020, and it's watermarked as a draft. Is that the policy currently in place and being followed?
Yes.
It is, so it's no longer a draft, it's in actual use, is it?
It is, yes.
Can I then turn to your role in control after your secondment had ended, and therefore looking at the period January 2015 to 2017? Can we go back to your inquiry statement, please, at page 3? And at page 3, paragraph 8, you say, during my secondment, I retained my rank, but it was not relevant to my role as part of a project team at CFOA. Keith Diamond covered my role in a temporary position while I was at CFOA, and he stayed on in a temporary SOM role once I returned. When you did come back, did you have any sort of handover with Keith Diamond?
Some, in terms of that we went back to sharing an office, so just general day-to-day stuff would be covered.
I mean, he didn't actually sit you down and say, this is what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years, this is what you need to know, here are the meeting minutes, you need to read them to refresh yourself?
No, not in that level of detail, although he would have taken time to explain some changes that I weren't aware of and why those had happened.
Did he explain any changes in policy in relation to emergency call management or communications with the fire ground?
No, I don't believe so.
Did he explain any changes that had occurred in relation to FSG calls, either in relation to policy changes or training changes or training delivery changes?
No.
Did you ask him any questions about that?
No, I think I would have, if I'd had any questions about that, I would have spoken to OST directly, probably.
Right. Can we turn the page then and look at paragraph 9? You say at the top of the page, it's disappeared, just bear with me. Paragraph 9, top of the page. This is your inquiry statement, LFB 00121219, page 4. You say there, I returned from CFOA in January 2015 and took on overall responsibility for OST, which included line managing the training element of OST. Now, line managing the training element, Scott Hayward says in his second witness statement, and it's paragraph 68 of page 13 for those who want to see it, that you had overall responsibility for training from January 2015. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who were you line managing in respect of training?
So I think I'm just referring to here when I left my role prior to that, I had line management responsibility for the 2 technical TSG team in there, and when I came back I had all of OST, so the technical element and the training, the line management for Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea that I hadn't had before.
Right. Did you have any kind of induction or training or preparation before you assumed line managing the training element of OST?
No, I did not.
Did you ask for any?
I would, throughout my career, asked for development in LFB. No, I didn't.
Why didn't you?
Particularly. Because I think as a senior management team, we were all very supportive with each other, and I would have been able to bounce ideas off of them and talk to them. And the OST team by that time had been well established. Chris and Nikki had been trainers for a significant period of time, a long period of time, and had underseen the initial FSG training. So I always knew I could rely on them for support and help as well.
Yes, Chris and Nikki being Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea.
Yes.
And as you go on, I think, to say in paragraph 10, if you scroll down page 4, you identify them there in the second line. You say there was continuity with Chris Sharp, Nikki O'Shea, and later Sheila Lewis, Kate Ranson and Joanne Reen. And then you go on to say, 2 lines on, Chris Sharp retired in 2016. Both Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea, I think something, in 2015. Do I take it that the result of whatever it was that happened to them, which has been redacted out, you were without their expertise from some point in 2015?
On occasions.
Now, did you have anyone else assisting you with the OST training function in 2015, other than, for some of that time, Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea?
Yes, so as I've said there, 2015, one of my first tasks given to me by Scott when I returned was to create a training plan for all 100 staff in how we could train on the new vision mobilising system. So that was quite a task to achieve, and I would have used Chris and Nikki's support, and I can remember drafting that report, and Keith, myself and Scott discussing it, but that was a priority. We were due to go live. We'd already delayed going live with the vision mobilising system once, and we were due to go live, I believe, in the summer of 2015. So that was trying to arrange over 2,000 hours worth of training for control staff on the vision mobilising system, and that was prior to actually having a version that we could actually see and use and begin to use before all the problems were identified. So we were always looking for staff to support the rollout of that.
Now, we know that you ran the technical support side of the OST before you left for the CFOA in September 2012. When you came back in January 2015, who then ran the technical support side once you'd taken over responsibility for training?
I would have had responsibility for both elements. By that time, they'd merged into one. I think that happened with the retirement of both Paul and Graham, and they were just the operational support team then, and they all did all the functions.
Right. So the functions then merged.
Yes.
Together. Now, once you came back in 2015, were you being managed by POM Hayward?
Yes.
And did the line management in practice work in the same way that it had before you'd left?
Probably better, but yes.
In what way better?
That we probably spoke more, that we probably were tasked with a number of projects. The vision mobilising system is a good example of how that took up a great deal of everyone's time to get that in.
Yes. Did you meet regularly?
Yes.
Did you minute your meetings?
No.
Did you ever report to AC George once he was in post after March 2016?
No, not directly.
Did you report to AC Brown at any time?
Not directly. Maybe on occasion when Scott was absent, and I had some dealings with AC Brown and AC George after the vision mobilising system went live.
Can we go to page 6 of your statement, please, paragraph 15? You say there, I took over responsibility for the OST upon my return, and then you go on to say, in the second sentence, as part of both of my line management responsibility for OST and my responsibility for delivering operational changes into control, I would have been involved in reviewing the relevant training package and ensuring that the technical needs of the control room and the CROs were met. Just pausing there, you say that you would ensure that the technical needs of the control room and the CROs were met.
Yeah.
Were you also responsible for ensuring that the training needs of all of the staff, for example, the CROs and the supervisors, were met?
No, I wouldn't have said that was my role. Delivery of training and the OST creating training packages, I would have said was my responsibility. I wouldn't have said my responsibility was deliver and making sure that all the training needs for the control room staff were met. No.
You're drawing a distinction I'm not sure I've fully grasped. Are you saying that there were OST training packages, but there was other training that the control room would have to undergo, which was not your responsibility?
Yes.
What was that? What did that entail?
So I think you've had examples of supervisor training. A lot of on-watch training would have been undertaken.
Yes. So you wouldn't have had any involvement in that?
I may have had some conversations over the period of time that we're talking about. I think I managed 3 OMs at one point. I sometimes, and then my responsibilities change yet again, and I'm managing 6 OMs and the OST team. And then I think that changes again. So over the time, I would have had conversations as line manager for some operations managers.
Right.
And their staff and some development of their staff. But what I was trying to draw a distinction was that in my role as OST, we were responsible for delivering operational changes. Some of those were system changes, some of those were technical changes. More often they were both dovetail into one, and creating training packages and making sure that CROs understood those. training packages. The responsibility for training all CROs, I don't believe, fell under me.
What training packages and training delivery were you not responsible for? What areas of the control room's activity were you not responsible for so far as training was concerned?
So sorry, the development of control staff that was done on watch. I would have been responsible for ensuring that OST were able to provide some training on changes to operational changes and any changes on the system.
Now, if you go to paragraph 9 of your statement,
Yeah.
please, if you go back to page 4, you say there that you would not review every training package. Just in general terms, did you review every training package? And if you didn't, who did?
In general terms, no, I didn't review every training packages. I just don't think my workload would have allowed for that. And there were people in the OST that were creating those training packages. The role of OST has changed over time, but it is still a unique role where not only do you have to understand the change that's being introduced from an operational point of view, understand what they are required, what the operational element requires, then understand how that needs to change in control, then understand the technical support that needs to be given to that change, to deliver that change, then create a training package to deliver that change, and then deliver that to 100 staff. It's not by any means easy, and that is not their full responsibility as well. They have to do other tasks as well. So it is quite technical. They are subject matter experts, and they are extremely knowledgeable on those facts. And I, like all us, the senior management team, would have relied on those and their interaction with the control room, that what they were putting in their training packages was appropriate for control staff, and especially with Nikki, O'Shea and Chris. They were very well respected control officers. People listened to them and liked their style of delivery.
Were you responsible, or were you not responsible, for FSG training for all staff after January 2015?
No, I wouldn't have said I was personally responsible for FSG training for all 100 staff. I, in my time in charge of OST, spent a lot of time trying to work out, especially in 2015, with the vision changes and everything that was happening with the mobilising system, how we could go about delivering FSG training to 100 staff. I was really conscious when I came back that we had committed to training and refresher training every year. And I would have said throughout that time, even though the mobilising system was being introduced, even though we were rolling out a significant amount of training to control staff on a new mobilising system. And to put it in context, this was a system that everything changed for them, even their functionality down to their keyboards, their telephony system, whatever they were using, changed, and that took time.
Right.
And even during...
Sorry, you hadn't finished your...
Sorry, I was going to say, even during that, I know I tried very hard to roll out fire survival guidance training in 2015.
Breaking this up a little, you were, after January 2015, is this right, SOM, in charge of training?
in charge of OST, which included delivering trainer-led training to control staff.
Yes, that was your domain.
Yes.
Yes. And within that domain, is this right, fell fire survival guidance?
That was one of the training courses amongst many that we, rolled out to control staff.
Was there anybody else at your level in the reporting chain with whom you shared that responsibility?
No.
Now, you mentioned a training plan.
Did I?
Can I just show you what Scott Hayward says in his second witness statement? LFB 000086213, page 7, paragraph 37. He says, and this is in answer to the question, please explain who was responsible for ensuring that the recurring programme was established and maintained. He says, OST was responsible for establishing and maintaining the recurring training plan as directed by the SOM. After I assumed head of service in 2016, I was accountable for ensuring that training was delivered. Prior to this, an assistant commissioner would have had responsibility for ensuring training was delivered. This would have sat with AC Chandler and thereafter AC Tom George prior to 2016. Between 2009 and 2019, I delegated training responsibilities to a number of SOMs, all of whom were control staff, and so would have held the appropriate knowledge and experience to oversee this training. You see that?
Yes.
Just pausing there. Do you agree with that? Does that accord with your recollection?
Yes. And in 38 of his statement, appropriate knowledge and experience within how the control room ran and was managed. But no, I didn't have any specific knowledge and experience in training delivery.
And if you turn to page 8, paragraph 39, he says, I delegated responsibility for this training as follows. SOM Lindsay Turner was responsible from 2009 until 2012. SOM Vic Bagnall was responsible from 2012 until 2015. And SOM Joanne Smith was responsible from 2015 until 2019. Looking at the last of those 3 bullet points, which refers to you, do you agree?
Yes.
Yes. And did you see it that Scott Hayward was not accountable for training until he became head of service in 2016, or did you think that he was as your line manager?
As my line manager and principal operations manager for control, I would have assumed that.
Yeah. Now, if we go back to your witness statement, please, Ms. Smith, at page 5, paragraph 13. There's a question above paragraph 13 as follows. How the OST went about identifying training needs, developing training to meet those needs, and delivering that training. And you say, the OST training team identify, create, and deliver training to new entrants and existing control room staff. For example, the OST training team identify issues highlighted during an incident or a call and would discuss how best to address these issues. Was it your responsibility to ensure that OST identified, created, and delivered training packages after January 2015?
Yes, in terms of newly created packages, in terms of some operational changes that were coming that we needed to implement. Some of the training that they would have undertaken would have been between themselves and the operations managers on a watch, had they asked them to do that. Yeah.
And was that so only after your stint at the CFOA, or was it the case also before you left the CFOA?
No, I think that was after.
Only after?
Yes.
Yes. Would you seek to identify training packages that were needed for control staff?
Yes, and that would have been through my work just with other operational departments in LFB. So one of them an example would have been the liaison that we'd had with the operational resilience team in terms of training staff for an MTA incident, a marauding terrorist attack. So that would have been one example where London Fire Brigade would have been preparing an operational response, and then we would have worked with them to create the control room response, and therefore I would have gone to OST and asked them to create a training package with some key issues in it and what we needed to achieve.
You say you would have gone to OST and asked them to create a training package.
Yeah.
Just to be specific, and we're obviously talking about the period after January 2015.
Yes.
Who would it have been, or who was it, who actually created those training packages at your request?
From what I recall, the individuals in OST, we would sit down and discuss it, and one of the staff would take the lead on it.
You say one of the staff?
Yes.
At what level?
One of the members of OST, the AOM level. They were all
Right.
assistant operations managers.
So before, at some point in 2015, that would be Chris Sharp and Nikki O'Shea. Would it, or would it?
Yes, and we would have had new members in there. I think I refer to a number of staff that would have joined and remained after they'd given their assistance to introducing the vision mobilising system. So they would have all have taken a subject and delivered that subject.
And would you review those packages?
On occasion, I might have had some input when they were developing them, and we would have talked about if that was going in the right way. And on occasion, that would have happened, yes.
You say on occasion. I mean,
Yeah.
was that a formalised system, or was it just a spot check by you? What would occasion be occasion?
It wouldn't have been a spot check with me, but we were working closely with them, so I would have talked to them about the need to create it and where that had come from. They would have gone away and done some work. Like I say, they probably would have covered some technical issues and elements that we would have need to have changed, along with some changes to procedure that we would have needed to work out, and we would have sat together and discussed whether they needed to be in a training package, how that training package should have been worked out and delivered, how long the training would have been, and how we would achieve that.
Did they provide the training package to you for your review, comments, feedback, or did they come to you with specific questions, problems, features, and ask for your comments?
Maybe a mix of both. I don't recall ever receiving a completed training package to look at, but I think just in the normal course of how we ran in OST, we would have had a meeting and run through the training package.
Would you be required to sign off the training packages?
No, there was no process in place. I'm not aware that there's ever been a formal process to sign off training packages.
So at what point would a training package be understood by you as ready for delivery?
I don't think, again, there was ever a setup like that. They would have gone away and created it. We would have had some meetings in between, made sure that the points were covered that we wanted to get over from the changes, and then they would have delivered those changes.
Now, Scott Hayward says in his first statement, it's paragraph 54 at page 19, that the SOM responsible for training would liaise with OST and do the training. Is it right that the SOM would do the training?
No. So in terms of doing the training, be part of training delivery, or sit as a CRO to do the training?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sorry.
Well, I'm just putting to you what he says. Perhaps I'll show it to you and ask you whether he's right or wrong. Can we go, please, to his first statement, LFB 00055 191, page 19, paragraph 54. I'll share it to you on the screen and then ask you whether you agree. He says in paragraph 54, in the third line, the SOM responsible for training would liaise with OST and do the training. Is that right, or is that not right?
No, I don't believe so. So my interaction with OST would have been prior to the training being rolled out. OST would have done the training delivery.
Right, I see. So not the SOM responsible, the OST members.
Yes.
And who would those have been until the departure of Nikki O'Shea and Chris Sharp?
So Chris retired in December, I believe, 2016, but Nikki O'Shea is still in the OST team.
Right. But would it have been one or other of them?
Yes, on occasions, and we had other members that had come in.
Right. So it would have been the OMs.
AOMs.
The AOMs.
Yes.
Right. So the training was being delivered to CROs by those who were immediately line managing them.
No, the members of OST didn't line manage any CROs.
Forgive me, but they had a rank of AOM.
They had a rank of AOM and CROs and AOMs from the watches, and OMs from the watches would have attended the training sessions
I follow.
Run by OST AOMs.
So, forgive me, but is this right, that those AOMs sitting in the OST were not actually operating AOMs in the control room, or were they?
No, that's correct. They weren't.
Ah, thank you. Now, who had oversight of who in control was receiving this training in and from 2015?
So OST would have kept a spreadsheet, would have kept me up to date, and the OMs would have been aware of who was receiving training on their watches.
Now, they would have kept a spreadsheet. Now,
Yes.
How was that kept? Was that kept on a control system, or was that spreadsheet kept on a brigade-wide system?
So I think it was kept on a spreadsheet on a database in OST, and then it was uploaded. It was sent to information management on either a monthly or quarterly basis to upload onto training records.
Right.
Brigade-wide training records.
And that was STEP, wasn't it?
I believe so.
Yes. And who was it who created the inputs into that spreadsheet, so far as control training was concerned?
So that would have been whoever was training, whoever was the training lead and delivering the training for that session would have entered in the session and entered in the attendees.
And you say that you saw that spreadsheet from you would check it. Is that right?
Check would probably be a wrong assumption. So I knew where the spreadsheet was, and we would have had discussions when we rolled out some training about the amount of staff we were training, who was left to train, any mop-up or catch-up sessions.
You say that OST would have kept you up to date.
Yes.
Would they have regularly sent you the spreadsheet for you to review so that you could monitor periodically the state of training of the control room staff?
No, they would have sent the training records up to information management to go on the step, and would have just kept me up to date with how they were progressing. If they hadn't managed to do any of the session, a pre-planned session, because there was an incident or we might have been short of staff, and then what they were going to do to catch up with those staff.
Right. So does that tell us that you were kept up to date on an ad hoc basis?
When we were delivering OST training, I would have said that was pretty frequent. And I think a lot of the training, especially that we had to undertake in 2015, 2016, was changes to operational processes and procedures, which all control staff needed to know to do to answer calls. So there wasn't an occasion where we couldn't not train people and make sure that they were familiar with the change, because that needed to be done. And sometimes we weren't able to do that prior to the change going live, and sometimes we had to do that after that, and other times it was done on watch, which wasn't ideal either.
No, well, we'll come to look at that slightly different topic in a moment. I'm just, if I can, I want to stay on the question of your involvement in monitoring the receipt of training. You say you were kept up to date. Did you yourself ever periodically spot check the spreadsheet and make sure that the right number of control room staff were receiving that training?
No. So just to be clear on what I was trying to say, the change that we'd rolled out that we would roll out training for needed to be undertaken. So it wasn't a case of spot checking to see if it had been completed. I would have been aware of what was happening, how they were delivering it, and then if they hadn't managed to achieve it, without looking at the spreadsheet.
And just remind me, how frequently did this spreadsheet go to step? Was it monthly?
It may have been monthly or it may have been quarterly. I think it changed over a period of time. So I think originally it was quarterly, maybe it changed to monthly.
Were you not interested just to look at the spreadsheet to know the numbers? How many had received training and on what during that period?
Well, as I say, they were all related to changes, and I would have known that we were training the majority of control staff in those changes because they needed to know those changes to do their role.
So what was it then that the OST training team did by way of keeping you informed if you were already aware of what was happening?
That's through them. I would have been aware of through them.
I see.
And also if there had been any issues with training on the watch, that would have been discussed at Brigade control management meetings as well with the operations managers. They may have raised that. It may also have come up, and I think sometimes did, at joint control committee meetings.
Now, we may come to this in some detail later on, but just while we're on the point, did you ever do anything at this time to satisfy yourself that the record keeping by the AOMs of those control room staff receiving the training was adequate?
I think there would have been some discussions. I think at one point, and this is only a vague recollection, that there was some, we identified, or someone had identified that the courses were being put down in differently, depending on the trainer that was delivering it. And I think there was an exercise to streamline and to create some course codes so it was clearer for staff.
Can we look at Scott Hayward's first statement, please, at page 18, paragraph 52? And I want just to come back to the point you mentioned a moment ago about interruptions. He says here, due to the need to ensure that control is able to continue to carrying out its day-to-day functions, most training by necessity is delivered to staff who are on watch. This means that if there is a significant incident or a sudden increase in calls, the staff, including the OST, might be recalled to their positions in the control room to answer and handle 999 emergency calls. How would the training be completed if a training session was interrupted by a significant incident or a sudden increase in calls?
So if it was just a sudden increase in calls, a spike in calls, then the control staff would have returned to training after that had calmed down. But if it was a significant incident, the training then would have just been rescheduled at some point.
And how did you oversee and ensure that everyone completed their training, either by picking up the reins at the end of the incident or the rescheduling?
I didn't. That would have been a task for the OST trainer to do.
So you say that wasn't your task?
No, they would have been proficient to do that. Like I say, we all knew that the changes needed to be rolled out to all staff, and they would have made their best endeavours to make sure that they picked stuff up the next time they were on duty or when available.
Why was the training organised when the staff were on watch?
So the vision training wasn't. I think we'd had occasions where we had arranged and made arrangements for staff to come in off duty to deliver some of the training. I think that happened in 2010, and I think that happened. That was part of the training plan I delivered in 2015 for vision training, but we had moved to a shift pattern with variable staffing that provided a 4-hour training window, which was daily. So as a watch rotated round, out of every 3 days on watch, they would have had a 4-hour training period in which to undertake any training, and we had a minimum of 20 staff on duty during that time. So that would have allowed us to take a number of staff out in the room to deliver that training. So the training time was seen as sufficient and adequate to deliver to all staff.
I mean, in practice, after January 2015, was it a problem that training would be interrupted by calls or call handling needs, or on the whole, did the on-watch training succeed in getting the training across to CROs within the 4-hour slot?
No. So when I returned from CFOA in 2015, the 4-hour training slot had changed to a 2-hour training slot to accommodate the resource management team that had come in, and I believe that was the discussion to accommodate the undertaking of the standby module. And so the 4-hour training slot had moved to a 2-hour training slot, which probably due to the staffing deficiencies as well, made it very hard and unachievable to facilitate all the training in that period. But I think we'd recognise that certainly when AC George was in and undertaking his review, we were looking to propose a new shift pattern which gave staff a whole day's training, I believe every 6 weeks. And AC George had set up a peer group with some control officers and some AOMs, and he asked me to present that shift pattern there. So we were always looking for that. I think we'd also raised, and during 2015 we had raised the issue with the representative bodies about moving, apologies, it would have been after the SBM function moved back to Stratford, about moving the short shift back to 10 o'clock to give us that 4-hour overlap period, so 4 hours in training again.
Did you ever consider a system whereby you train CROs routinely off the watch?
Yes, and like I say, we did use that for vision training in the end. I think that relies on obviously staff having to come in addition to their training on watch, which some staff may not wanted to do, and there was always the pressure with then the costs that would involve.
Did you or anybody else evaluate or review the training packages or the delivery of the training?
Review the delivery of the training. So did I know it was taking place? Did I know that sometimes we weren't able to achieve that? Yes.
Did you evaluate or review it for quality assured?
No, only in terms of my original discussions with the OST team.
Why did you not, or why did the Brigade not evaluate or review the training packages or delivery for quality?
I don't know. I wasn't quality. I wasn't trained in any quality assurance. It would have only been through feedback from the operations managers at BCMB and at JCC that we would have looked had there been any particular issues, and feedback from the staff. And I hoped that I would have addressed those.
From January 2015 at least, how much of your time was dedicated to your training role or your responsibility for training within the OST? I know it's a difficult thing to estimate, but can you give us a rough idea?
I would have said from the beginning of 2015 until the middle of 2016, possibly the end of 2016, my role with vision and the mobilising system was all-consuming.
So not much, it would be the answer to the
Well,
question.
in terms of the amount of training we had to deliver to all our staff in terms of training for the vision system, yes, a considerable amount, as well as all the technical challenges we faced prior to go live and then after go live.
I'd like now to turn to Lacanal and Lacanal action points and the Lacanal action plan. And I'd like to start within that major topic with Action 5, which is the gap analysis, and Action 10, a review of emergency call handling policy 539. Can we start, please, with the assurance report of November 2012, LFB 404801. This is the Lacanal House Incident Assurance Review of August 2018. Now, if we go to page 12 in that, please, it says Action 5 on the right-hand side at the bottom. Undertake a gap analysis of Brigade, National and Brigade fire survival guidance policies and guidance in order to produce a report identifying where Brigade controlled fire survival guidance policy differs from the national guidance. And if we go to your witness statement at paragraph 20 on page 9, you say there that you worked on that gap analysis.
Yes, I did.
I'm summarising quite a long paragraph. You also say that you worked on it with Scott Hayward, Tom Davis, Pete Zimanzik and Tim Cutbill.
Yes.
What was your role in that review?
From a control point of view, to look at the extant national guidance and compare that to LFB policies, procedures and training materials, and identify the gaps.
Now, if we then look back to the November 2012 Lacanal Control Report, we have that at a number of places. This one is at HOM 401124. You can see that this is dated November 2012.
Yes.
Now, this report obviously is something we're going to come back to a number of times. You had left, I think, by November 2012 for the CFOA.
I had, yes.
A couple of months before. But do I take it that you were familiar with this in draft before you left and became familiar with it once you came back?
Yes.
I mean, we'll see how we go with it, but
Okay.
as a general proposition. Can we then go to page 4 and look at paragraph 3? That says there, this report comes at the end of a long piece of work and builds on a gap analysis between national guidance and LFB policy and training included in this report at Annex B, which was completed in April 2010. Just for the best of your recollection, is that correct? The gap analysis was completed in April 2010?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we go back to your witness statement, please, at page 9, you tell us there at paragraph 21, in terms of methodology, I recall we reviewed the circumstances of the FSG calls taken during the Lacanal House fire against the extant national guidance at the time, including FSC, Fire Service Circular 1093, and 54/2004. First, is it right to say that as part of your gap analysis, or at least that part with which you were involved, you compared the LFB's policy on call management, policy number 539, against the national guidance?
So LFB policy, but we also use the training and the procedures, so the RIF, against national guidance, yes.
Now, you suggest that you compared it against both Fire Service Circular 1093 and Fire Service Circular, or FSC, 54/2004. Scott Hayward says, and he told us this on day 199 at page 158 and 159, that after a discussion with DAC Cutbill and Tom Davis from LFB's legal department, he said it was felt it wasn't required. FSC 54/2004 wasn't required. Is that right?
So, yes, I think that is correct. So we'd looked at 54/2004. We'd gone back in the archives and tried to find out where a decision has been taken not to adopt 54/04. I think in Scott Hayward's evidence, he says about it needing a number of prompts and a mobilising system to support that, and I think we agreed with that. But I think we had also looked at the documents or the detail in 54/2004 and were assured that everything in relating to FSG was covered in the body of text in Fire Service Circular 1093.
So it had never been adopted previously by the
No.
Brigade. Was that the reason why it then wasn't reviewed for the purposes of the gap analysis?
No, I don't think so. I think we looked at that and thought that everything contained in 54/2004 relating to fire survival guidance was contained in the body of text in Fire Service Circular 1093, and therefore if we just reviewed 1093, that would have everything in it.
Yes, I think you said in your police statement, and we can look at it if you like, that 54/2004 included prompts for a number of scenarios like chemicals, CRBN, and a water incident.
Yes.
And because the technology available in the control room and the mobilising system couldn't support that framework, you didn't implement that guidance.
So that wouldn't have been a decision that I would have made in LFB. In 2004, I wasn't there, so that's only just some historical from discussing it. If it helps, when I was in Essex Fire Brigade, it wasn't adopted there either.
I see. So this predated your time?
Yes.
Now, Scott Hayward said in his evidence, and again, we don't need to see it, it's paragraph 20 on page 6 of his first statement, first bullet point, that LFB's Policy 539, Emergency Call Management, was compared to the FSG training package in place at the time of the Lakenal House fire. Do you recall that?
Yes, so I think, from my understanding of the gap analysis, we used Fire Service Circular 1093 and compared it with all extant LFB policy, but also training notes and procedures. So yes, PN 539 would have been reviewed in light of that.
As part of the comparator, were you comparing 539 as it then stood, which was the 2007 edition, with a document issued by the Home Office in 1994 called Keeping People Safe?
I don't recall that document. Is that not 54?
No, let me show it to you.
Sorry, please do.
Indeed, it's annexed as Annex C to this report, the Lakenal Control Report. I'll show that to you. If you go, please, to LFB 404750, please. That is the first page of the annexes to the November 2012 LFB Control Report for Lakenal. And if we go to page 25 in this document, we can see Annex C, which is the Home Office document from 1994, entitled Making People Safe. Let's go to page 26, please, in the first page of the document. There is a lino-cut graphic, emergency call handling techniques, fire survival guidance. Does that look familiar to you?
So that looks familiar as a training package that came with 1093.
Right. In fact, it was published the following year, but it doesn't matter.
No.
When you refer to the training package with 1093,
Yes.
we can take it that included this.
We can.
Now, let's go back to your statement then, please, at page 10, and let's look together at paragraph 23. You say there, in the first line, following the finalised gap analysis, we used the report to ensure that the FSG training covered all elements of FSC 1093 and to update PN 539. Now, is the update to PN 539 that you're referring to there the one approved on the 3rd of September 2010?
I would presume so.
And is it right that you also used the findings of your gap analysis to create the FSG reference information files for both operators and supervisors?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to look first, if I may then, at the findings of your gap analysis and the changes that were made to PN 539. Can we start that exercise with paragraph 34 of your witness statement at page 14, if we move on a few pages, page 14. And you say this, at paragraph 34, and you'll note the question, at paragraph 34 you say, we reviewed, this is the end of the third line, we reviewed PN 539 in light of the gap analysis conducted after the Lacknell House incident. I recall that I would have looked through the policy with Scott Hayward, identifying relevant and non-relevant items, and considered where amendments should be made based on our findings in the gap analysis. And you refer earlier in that paragraph to the version of 539 at the time, and you note the document history at page 22, which set out the entirety of the policy's history. Can we look at the document you exhibit, JS11? That is at LFB 00121222, please. Now, that is emergency call management. Now, that version is the one reviewed in March 2014. That can't, therefore, have been the one you were reviewing when you did your gap analysis.
No.
Nonetheless, if we go to page 22, we can see the full document history, I think, which is, I think, what you were referring to. Audit trail. And you can see that the changes are described in the middle column. Whole document reviewed as current and updated. This is the second entry down. Whole document reviewed as current and updated throughout. Additional and amended appendices. Statistics quoted for emergency calls taken from January to December 2009. Date, 3rd of September 2010. So we can use that date, I think, can we, safely as the date of amendment in response to the gap analysis.
Yes.
Is that right? Now, the owner of the policy at that stage was the head of operational response, wasn't it?
Possibly, yes.
And that would have been Dave Brown.
I believe so.
Did he have final sign-off on these changes?
Sorry, I'm not sure. It would have been in 2010.
Right. Who would it have been then?
It may have been, sorry.
Right, okay. Did he have final sign-off on these changes, on the changes which we're going to look at?
No, not that I recall. That we would have made some changes, and they would have been submitted to LFB document management.
And after the amendment of the policy on the 3rd of September, did control room staff receive specific training on the changes that had been made?
In relation to the policy,
Yes.
no, if they had have received an update, that may have been through an email to let them know that those changes had been made. And any of the changes, I'm sure we worked hard to make sure they were reflected in the training that was rolled out.
Now, we can see from this page that after the 3rd of September, the policy was further amended a number of times, up to and including the 6th of April 2017, yes?
Yes.
Would you have made or reviewed those changes?
Not that I can recall. Maybe they're altered to reflect the latest reference information file on FSG in 2011.
Who would have had final approval on those changes, if not you?
I think that would have been the POM.
They would have come through you, though, wouldn't they?
No, not all the time. They would have come through me.
What
The other senior operations manager could have updated them. They might have been generated internally in LFB. So the change from team leader to assistant operations managers, they could have come from a variety of sources.
What would be the route for approval of any amendment to a policy such as this?
I would imagine it would depend on the change. So if it was a change that, as we've said here, in terms of, changing the appendices, depends if it was just one word change or if it was just an update. Maybe they would have done that themselves. OST could have done that just to affect a change. Other times, if it was a major change, we would have all been aware as senior operations managers and principal operations managers. We might have discussed it at a brigade control management meeting too.
Right, can you just help me with this? Presumably someone holds a master version of every policy or comparable document.
Yes.
Who holds the master version of this one?
So this is held, we have an internal department in LFB that holds all documents.
Well, sorry, when I say who holds it, I mean who ultimately has responsibility for deciding whether a change should be accepted or not.
So if I wanted to change because we'd made a change to a policy or procedure and that I wanted to update the policy, then I would request it from document management and they would send it through to me. I would make track changes, add the audit trail at the end and send it back. And it is common practice now that is undertaken by the OST team. And they do that. They have done that and do that to date.
And I'm having just difficulty, you see, in understanding quite who has the ultimate authority to decide whether a change is made or not. Now, document management is presumably a body within the LFB,
yes,
which simply holds all the documents.
It does.
But is there no provision for determining whose authority is required to make a change?
No, I'm not aware of anyone, anything that I would have made a change to that I would have needed to go and seek permission from, because the change would have been reflected of the policy or procedure we'd just implemented and the document would have just been updated for that fact.
All right, thank you.
Well, let me just see if I can explore that a little bit further. Can we look at the version that was amended in September 2010? That is at LFB 404735. Which has been described in the audit trail as amended throughout. And here is the first page of it. It's Issue date is, as we've seen before, November 2007. Reviewed as current 3rd of September 2010. Owner, Head of Service Delivery and Mobilising. Now, who was it as at 3rd of September 2010 who was Head of Service Delivery and Mobilising?
I'm sorry, I can't remember. It may well have been AC Brown.
Right. And whether it was or him or somebody else, is it the owner of the policy who has ultimate sign-off on its contents?
Well, I would say yes, but in practical terms, I don't believe that happens. Or that happened back then.
Right. Why is... I say how come, which is a rather broad question. What would be the process, or what was the process, whereby this document was authorised for use?
So a change of policy or procedure would have usually come as a point of several departments may wish to change a policy or procedure. In terms of the control ones that we owned, if we'd had an amendment and a change of procedure or policy, as I said, whoever was dealing with that change would have requested the document from document management, would have made the updates and would have sent that back to document management, and may have actually either informed us if the change was being made lower down, or I would have informed the POM that I'd made the change, or the POM himself may have made the change to reflect that. It could have been a variety of individuals.
In practice, I can understand how what you just told us would create the document, but who signed this off?
I don't believe anyone signed it off. I would imagine if this is a result of the changes that we identified from the gap analysis, both Scott and I would have worked on the changes, would have edited it and updated it, and one of us would have sent it off to...
Let me ask you this way. Is it right that this document would not have been deployed for use by the control room unless you were fully satisfied with its contents?
Yes, with this version, if I was aware of that, if I'd been editing it, yes, I would have been satisfied that the amendments I had made would have been correct.
Did any board exercise any oversight of these amendments which came into this policy at this time?
They may well have done, because the gap analysis had been agreed by the Lacanal board, and so they probably saw a copy of the changes we'd made to emergency call management.
Did you, as a matter of corporate governance, did you have to present a significantly amended policy such as this to the Lacanal board?
From recollection, I can recall there was a great degree of scrutiny over control, and so I would have thought that we would have done that, and they would have wanted that.
Do you remember yourself, from your recollection, going to a Lacanal House board meeting and taking them through this newly amended policy and explaining the differences between it and its predecessor?
No, not specifically, but if I hadn't, maybe DAC Tim Cutwell would have done that, because everything we did in terms of the gap analysis and review was done jointly with him and Tom Davis.
Our records show from the minutes of the Lacanal board in September, November and December 2010 that although the Lacanal board were told that this policy was being and had been amended, no approval of that board appears to have been sought, and we see no record of any detailed explanation of this policy to it. Would that accord with your recollection?
Yes, possibly. I don't recall giving a presentation on the detail of emergency call management, although I do recall some general comments about the policy being very unwieldy, the policy containing more information than policy guidance. I'm not sure if that came from that time or later.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Well, it is, but I'd just like to ask one other question before we break. I think you told us a little while ago that sometimes a policy was amended to reflect a change in practice. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, now I'm going to ask you the same sort of question. Whose authority was required for a change in practice?
So a change of practice would have been usually generated by a change of equipment or an introduction of a change from the operational side.
Yeah.
So that would have been discussed and taken through various boards operationally and agreed. And then the change of practice would have been for control to implement, because realistically any change of policy or practice on the instant ground or new equipment would have a knock-on impact in control. So it would have changed our practices.
Right, and did someone need to, even if it's only a case of rubber stamping, need to approve the change in practice within the control room, someone at a fairly senior level?
Yes, I think that would have been whoever was dealing with the operational element and the changes, and certainly I took on a more focused operational, if you like, role when I returned in 2015, 2016. So the change in the agreed change of practices would have, I would have agreed those.
You could do that, could you?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. You want to follow that up at all?
Thank you.
Right, well, thank you very much. We'll break at this point, have some lunch. We'll resume, please, at 2:00. And once more, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 2:00, Mr. Bennett. Thank you.